Over a year ago, I made a video explaining the powers and backstories of all the many children of the original 7 Deadly Sins. But since that time, we have had some insane updates, including the reveal of a new child, the secret daughter of Merlin and Escanor. And we also got a whole bunch of new information about some of the kids that we already knew about. So in this video, I will explain all 11 children of the 7 Deadly Sins and their powers right here in one place. So let's get into it. You guys know the drill. If you enjoy these videos and you want to see more 4 Knights of the Apocalypse and 7 Deadly Sins content in the future, leave a quick like and comment for that YouTube algorithm. And if you want to make sure that you won't miss future videos, then be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. Let's start things off with the newest child to be added to the list, the secret daughter of Merlin and Escanor. And when I say secret daughter, I really mean it. We didn't know she was their daughter until chapter 192 of the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse manga. And she herself didn't learn the truth until chapter 216. I am of course talking about Gawain, the final Knight of the Apocalypse to be introduced in the story. According to the prophecy, Gawain is the Knight of Famine, and she is described as a person who possesses gold-colored magic. This gold-colored magic is referred to as Dawn, but once we actually meet her and see her magic in action, we realize that she possesses what we really know as Sunshine, a divine grace that was originally possessed by Mael and later inherited by Escanor. The interesting thing about the prophecy is that when we are first shown a silhouette of the famous 4 Knights of the Apocalypse, Percival, Lancelot, and Tristan all look like older and more badass versions of their actual selves. However, the 4th Knight looks almost exactly like Escanor rather than Gawain, which I always thought was really interesting. Once we actually meet Gawain, we quickly realized that the obvious reference to Escanor in the silhouette image was no random coincidence. It turns out that Gawain somehow inherited the power of Sunshine after the tragic death of Escanor in the original 7 Deadly Sins manga. Now, some people believe that her magic Dawn isn't exactly the same as the Sunshine we know from the original series, but I think that the differences actually come from the magic that comes from her mother's side, but more on that later. Gawain openly calls herself the Master of the Sun, and she uses a weapon called Sacred Sword Rita, which is a direct reference to Escanor's divine axe Rita. She also uses magic spells like Absolute Cancel, and she can use advanced teleportation magic to instantly teleport from one spot to another. So from very early in the story, this seems to also suggest a clear connection between Gawain and Merlin, since one of the only people in the world who could teach her such powers would be Merlin herself. Because of these obvious connections, there was always a theory that Gawain is somehow related to Merlin and Escanor, but it took nearly 200 chapters to actually confirm this. If anything, the manga actually misdirects us about Gawain's family connections because she is initially introduced as the niece of King Arthur Pendragon. We eventually learned that Gawain is considered to be Arthur's niece because she was adopted by Arthur's brother Kay Pendragon, but to make things even more complicated, it turns out that Kay and Arthur are themselves not even related by blood. So because Gawain is adopted, she is not actually related by blood to either Kay or King Arthur. This is important to remember because a person's bloodline often determines what kind of powers and abilities they actually have in this world, and Gawain's powers were always much closer to Escanor and Merlin than to anyone in the Pendragon family. At first, the only thing that Gawain really knows about her own origins is that she was raised by Kay Pendragon and 2 weird magical puppets. Gawain refers to these strange puppets as Grandma and Grandpa, and apparently it was these puppets who taught her everything she knows about magic. To make things even more confusing, for much of the early parts of the story, we were led to believe that Merlin was residing with Arthur in Camelot, and that she was standing by him as he committed all the evil deeds that he was committing in this series. Merlin is shown standing right beside Arthur and seemingly supporting what he is doing several times, but then finally in chapter 91 it is revealed that this Merlin was actually a fake. This Merlin was actually a fairy that assumed the form of Merlin. And when Guinevere confronted Arthur about using a fairy to pretend to be Merlin, Arthur became upset and killed her, and at that point the unfortunate fairy finally reverts back to her normal form. The story of Gawain's secret origins really gets crazy about 100 chapters later, and this changes everything that we thought we knew, not only about the sequel manga, but also about the true ending of the original manga. In chapter 192, Gawain is finally confirmed to be the secret daughter of Escanor and Merlin, but that's not even the craziest part. As someone who suspected this to be the case all along, I wasn't even too surprised by this reveal, although it was still pretty shocking to have it finally confirmed. The thing that really shocked me was the reveal that both Merlin and Escanor are still alive and have been around Gawain the whole time. Those 2 weird magical puppets that raised Gawain and taught her everything she knows about magic were none other than Merlin and Escanor themselves. They did not want Gawain to know the truth about her parents, so they lied to her and told her to simply refer to them as Grandma and Grandpa. In chapter 192, we see Gawain's foster father Kay and Dubs, the giant, talking to the two magical puppets. One is like a creepy wooden puppet with a dress and high heels, and the other is some sort of animal skeleton in a suit. Kay is seen telling the two puppets that they should tell Gawain the truth. After all, that is the duty of every parent. The skeleton puppet says, "I'm not sure how I could do it. For that matter, would she believe us when we look like this?" The wooden puppet adds, "She would be so disappointed in us, and herself too." Kay responds by saying, "Well, that's up to Gawain herself to decide, isn't it? But as her foster father, I can tell you one thing, Escanor, Merlin, she's just as strong as the both of you." That is how the big reveal happens, and the scene ends there, without any satisfying explanation of how Escanor survived, how he managed to father a daughter with Merlin, and how Escanor and Merlin ended up as weird-looking magical puppets. For the answers to these questions, we had to wait until chapters 215 and 216. In these chapters, the mannequins of Merlin and Escanor finally reveal to Gawain that they are her real parents, and that they are actually two members of the legendary 7 Deadly Sins. Gawain is shocked, and she is visibly upset that they didn't reveal this information to her earlier. Merlin reveals that she entrusted Gawain to Kay Pendragon, her foster father, because Merlin and Escanor were both facing certain circumstances, and because Gawain is a knight of prophecy who is destined to save the world, Merlin asked Kay to take care of her as his own daughter. If the world knew that she was a daughter of Merlin and Escanor, she would have become a target for evildoers all over Britannia, including Arthur himself. And because Kay was the first to notice the negative changes in Arthur that chaos was creating, and because he wanted to make up for past mistakes with Arthur, he agreed to become Gawain's foster father. When Escanor is asked about the whole situation, he explains that he is actually dead. Yes, this mannequin body was created by Merlin in order to serve as a vessel for his soul. The physical body of Escanor really did die 18 years earlier during the epic battle against the Demon King, and as she witnessed Escanor's body burn away, Merlin felt a strong sense of loss like she never felt before. So she did a totally normal and rational thing. She took a bit of flesh from Escanor's body and mixed it with her own flesh to create Gawain through the use of a forbidden spell. So no, Gawain was not conceived in the traditional way. Rather, she was created with forbidden magic. She was never raised inside Merlin's womb, and in order to do this, Merlin had to break a very strict taboo. Merlin and Escanor were afraid that Gawain would be depressed when she learned that she was created artificially using forbidden magic, and that she wasn't just a normal person, so they never told her the truth. However, Gawain's reaction is basically the opposite of what her parents thought it would be. This new information simply reinforces Gawain's belief that she is truly special, and that she is on a whole other level from the rest of the normies of the world. Gawain asks if the fact that she was made and not born is the reason why she is not able to love anyone else, and in particular, she is wondering if that is why she has never been attracted to men. But Merlin explains that no, the reason why she's never been attracted to men is because Merlin placed a curse on her when she was an infant. Apparently, Merlin was so heartbroken by her unrequited love for Meliodas that she didn't want a man to break Gawain's heart and make her miserable. So, she decided to banish any romantic interest that Gawain might have in the opposite sex. Merlin then goes on to remove the curse, and Gawain immediately becomes interested in men. She suddenly feels shy and bashful when she realizes that Balin is standing too close to her. So yeah, I guess Gawain is into men now. When her parents ask Gawain if she can ever forgive them for what they did, she jumps up and hugs them both, and she says that she will forgive them only if they hold her tight. In the end, Merlin tells Gawain that she has a way to fight back against chaos, and if that is what Gawain seeks, then she will have to come and find the real Merlin. Merlin also says that the key to finding her is inside Gawain herself. We then see that Merlin's physical body is in fact alive and well, and that she is hiding away somewhere with the real Arthur Pendragon, who looks very different now. As it turns out, the evil Arthur, who has been the main villain of the story so far, is actually Cath Palug apparently, and he used the power of chaos to usurp the position of the original Arthur. Next, let's talk about the only child of the sin of greed, Bon, and the powerful fairy Elaine, the boy named Lancelot. Like Gawain, Lancelot is also one of the prophesized Knights of the Apocalypse, and more specifically, he is the Knight of War. The prophecy describes him as a mysterious boy with no fixed appearance, and this is because as a half-fairy, Lancelot possesses the ability to shapeshift, and when we first meet Lancelot in the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse manga, he actually appears in the form of a talking fox, who goes by the name Sin. But our first introduction to Lancelot actually came all the way back in the original 7 Deadly Sins manga, the bonus chapter 346.5. That chapter tells the story of how at age 10, Lancelot and Jericho went missing due to some shenanigans by the Lady of the Lake. Lancelot would be missing for 3 years, but then he would return in time for the Four Knights of the Apocalypse sequel. Now, fun fact, we only just recently learned Lancelot's full backstory and what he was doing after he was captured by the Lady of the Lake. This new update to his story also explains how he became so insanely powerful in the first place, so more on that in just a little bit. By the time we meet him in the sequel, Lancelot is already in the service of Meliodas, the King of Leones. Now aged about 16, Lancelot is basically a spy who has been ordered by Meliodas to find all 4 Knights of Prophecy and bring them to Leones. Despite being an incredibly strong warrior, most residents of Britannia have never even heard of Lancelot. That is because he doesn't allow his opponents to survive long enough to spread rumors about him. This guy is not your traditional shonen protagonist who tries to avoid killing at all costs. Lancelot is a spy, a secret agent, and he doesn't allow his enemies to live long enough to publicly reveal his identity and the true nature of his power. Even as a 10-year-old, Lancelot had astonishing combat capabilities, superior reflexes, and above-average physical strength. When they were younger, his power used to be about on par with Tristan, but when Lancelot returned after disappearing for 3 years, he was far stronger than before. Along with the ability to shapeshift, Lancelot's connection to the fairy clan also gives him the ability to read the minds of his opponents, which is a power known as heart reading. This ability is extremely useful in battle as it allows Lancelot to anticipate the opponent's next move, and since his opponents usually don't know anything about him or his fairy clan connection, Lancelot's ability catches them completely off guard. Lancelot is also a very skilled archer, and he uses a bow and arrow with unbelievable speed and accuracy. His offensive capabilities are downright insane, and we saw this early on as he was able to instantly kill Doronak, one of the Holy Knights of Camelot, with just like one punch to the gut. Lancelot has a magical ability called Shining Road, which allows him to fire a beam of light at an opponent. This beam of light will then chase after its target and follow it like a heat-seeking missile until it destroys it. Lancelot's true power is fully showcased in chapter 79 of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse manga when he takes on King Arthur one-on-one after Arthur already outclassed Tristan and after he managed to gain the upper hand on Meliodas, although to be fair, Meliodas was being held back by the fact that he was trying to protect his out-of-control son. Lancelot ends up intervening to stop Meliodas from being killed by Arthur, and then he goes toe-to-toe with Arthur himself. Lancelot lands several blows on Arthur, causing serious injury and forcing Arthur to activate the power of chaos in order to regenerate. Although I guess technically the power of chaos activates itself when it senses that its host might be in danger, so Arthur doesn't necessarily have to do anything, chaos just protects him. At this point, Arthur confirms that Meliodas at full power is still stronger than Lancelot, but there is no doubt that Lancelot is the strongest of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse by far. In fact, Meliodas and Tristan seem hopeful that even with the power of chaos actively protecting Arthur, Lancelot may still have a chance to defeat him. So how did Lancelot get so strong in the first place? How did he go from a boy whose strength was basically equal to his friend Tristan's to a massively overpowered monster that can go toe-to-toe with the main villain of the entire series? Well, it all goes back to that time that he had been missing for 3 years. The full truth is finally revealed in chapter 209 of the manga when we finally get to see what happened when Lancelot and Jericho disappeared. When they vanished, they were transported into a strange realm ruled by the Lady of the Lake. Although this creature appears at first to be a humanoid woman, she is actually an incredibly powerful creature born of chaos. As such, she is the daughter of chaos, and she is also considered to be the sister of Cath Palug. This creature's realm consists of a bunch of very narrow paths stretching across a seemingly endless and bottomless lake. Inside this realm, the sky is pitch black even during daytime, the path that runs atop the lake never actually ends, and while there is no food anywhere in this realm, drinking the water from the lake allows people to survive without needing to eat. Nevertheless, the lake is inhabited by dangerous tentacled creatures that will attack an unsuspecting visitor if they're not careful. And the lake is also full of human corpses, including the corpse of the peddler who tried to trick the fairies in Benwick before Lancelot whooped him back in chapter 346.5 of the original manga. As Lancelot and Jericho eventually learn, although drinking from the lake sustains them and gives them energy, drinking from the lake also eventually drives people mad. Jericho herself loses her mind around day 116, and Lancelot vows to find a way to save his master Jericho from madness. At one point, Lancelot finally meets face to face with the Lady of the Lake, and she explains that this lake has accumulated an infinite store of power. The lake is actually a massive storehouse of magic created by chaos itself. The lake is not even a real lake. It is magic force itself made visible by the sheer density of it. So anyone who drinks from the lake is consuming pure concentrated magic, and eventually this becomes too much for anyone to handle and they go mad. The Lady of the Lake reveals her hideous true form in chapter 210, and she also reveals that she is fascinated by Lancelot because even though he has been drinking from the lake for a very long time, he has been able to keep his wits about him. The Lady of the Lake abducts people in the first place because she's always bored being inside her realm by herself. But she's been very disappointed with humans because they can't handle living inside the realm for very long and they always go insane. However, Lancelot and his power is truly special, and he is growing stronger and stronger every day he spends inside the realm. The Lady of the Lake believes that eventually Lancelot will have more force than even the 7 deadly sins when they teamed up to defeat the Demon King. The lady says that she thinks she is falling in love with Lancelot because he possesses the greatest power and she stores infinite magic within her, so it's like they're the perfect couple. Anyway, the TLDR is that the Lady of the Lake never wants to let Lancelot go because she wants him to stay with her until he grows old and dies. She also says that she will kill Jericho so that Lancelot's master will no longer get in the way of their destined romance. When Lancelot sees that he has no other choice and that Jericho will die if he doesn't act now, he decides to jump into the lake and literally drink and consume the entire thing. This guy is an absolute mad lad, and in the end, that is exactly what he ends up doing. He ingests the Lady of the Lake and her infinite magic force. And this actually makes the lady happy because she remains conscious inside of Lancelot, and she feels like her dream has come true as she has been freed from her shackles and is no longer stuck inside that realm. And so, the real reason Lancelot is so much stronger than Tristan now is because he literally consumed an entire creature of chaos. A creature who was an infinite store of magic force, and now this creature resides inside of him. This means that her endless force is now Lancelot's command, so yeah, no wonder he is so freaking strong. But Lancelot better be careful, because we know from past experience that taking in the power of chaos inside of you has a powerful corroding and corrupting effect. Just ask Arthur. So let's hope that Lancelot knows what he's doing and that he won't ever be corrupted by chaos. Because if someone as powerful as him ever goes over to the other side, our heroes are in big trouble. Now let's talk about Prince Tristan, the only child of the Sin of Wrath Meliodas and Elizabeth Leonis. We first met Tristan in the original 7 Deadly Sins manga, where he appeared as a 10-year-old kid in chapter 346, the final chapter of the series. By start of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse sequel, Tristan is 16 years old, and he is prophesied to be one of the Knights of the Apocalypse. More specifically, he is the Knight of Pestilence, and the prophecy describes him as a boy who has both holiness and evil in his eyes. Since Tristan is the son of a demon and a goddess, and since he is able to use both demon and goddess powers, the prophecy about him possessing both evil and holiness is on point. Tristan makes his debut in chapter 54 of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, and he is identified as the Prince of Leonis, who has an entire order of holy knights under his command, a group known as the Tristan Platoon. Prince Tristan is a benevolent leader, and he is loved by his people and his subordinates. Due to his OP genetics, Tristan has had above average physical power and fighting ability ever since he was just a child. And as I mentioned earlier, he inherited the ability to use both goddess and demon powers because his parents are a goddess and a demon. He can even manifest these two completely different powers at the same time, giving him the kind of combo power that has never been seen before in the world of the 7 Deadly Sins and Four Knights of the Apocalypse. In fact, the sequel confirms that Tristan is officially classified as a member of an entirely new race, the Nephilim. He is neither a demon nor a goddess. Instead, he is the only known character in both the original series and the sequel who is a natural-born Nephilim. We have seen other instances of someone using both demon and goddess magic, like for example Mael Estarossa, but Tristan is the only true Nephilim from birth. This means that he has unique powers and abilities that no other character possesses. On top of that, Tristan's case is extra interesting because his father is a demon and his mother is a goddess in a human body. So Tristan technically has goddess, demon, and human traits. And that human part could actually turn out to be very important because there is a unique connection between humans and chaos power. Tristan has access to goddess magic, such as summoning large angelic wings that allow him to fly, using unbelievably powerful healing abilities, and using other standard goddess powers like Arc. Most of the time, at least initially, Tristan prefers to rely on his goddess powers alone, but when he is pushed to the point where he can't win by using only goddess magic, he is able to tap into his demonic side. When he taps into his demonic powers, Tristan's eyes turn black and a large demon mark appears on his forehead. This demon mode makes Tristan a lot more powerful, but it's also much harder to turn off and to control. In this form, Tristan basically goes berserk, and he makes rash and risky decisions that he would not have made normally. For example, Demon Mode Tristan tries to fight Chaos Arthur head-on despite clear indication that he still isn't strong enough to defeat him. And Tristan's father Meliodas is then forced to interfere and risk his own life in order to protect his son from Arthur. Tristan uses 2 swords in battle. One sword is black and the other is white. In one of the question corners, the author Nakaba Suzuki revealed that Tristan's 2 swords are actually named Mael and Estarossa, which is a very interesting and cool reference back to the original series. In the more recent chapters of the sequel manga, Tristan has been through a lot, including time skips, an expedition to the Demon Realm, and an infiltration of Camelot that resulted in him temporarily losing his memories and not knowing who he is or who his friends are. Eventually, he does regain his memories, and he is now becoming stronger than ever. In chapters 214 and 215, we see him training with his father Meliodas, and Meliodas acknowledges that Tristan has become incredibly strong. Meliodas also believes that now that Tristan and Isolde have confessed their love to each other and are together, he will become even stronger. This is because Meliodas believes that he himself became much stronger because of his love for Elizabeth. Now let's get to the kids of King and Diane, because these guys have been extremely busy in the 2 decades since the end of the original series, and they actually have 8 kids together, 7 biological and 1 adopted. The oldest is Myrtle, and although he doesn't realize it at first, he is actually a human who was adopted by King and Diane, so he doesn't actually have any fairy or giant blood even though he lives in the fairy realm. It turns out that Myrtle is a changeling, because as a baby he was switched with King and Diane's oldest biological child, who was then raised by humans, but more on that later. As a human, Myrtle always struggled to adapt to the difficult climate of the fairy realm, and he has to basically take special magical pills in order to be able to function properly. Because of this strange condition, Myrtle always suspected that something was off with him and that he might not be the real biological child of the Fairy King and the Giant Queen. These suspicions were reinforced by the fact that other fairies always treated him differently. They often questioned why the son of the most powerful creatures inside the fairy realm would need to take magical medication just to be able to function. Myrtle overcompensates for his insecurities by acting like he hates humans because of all the bad things that humans have done to fairies and giants throughout history. At one point, he was so desperate to fit in with the fairies and giants that he accepted a deal with King Arthur's henchmen, a deal that would have allegedly cured the illness that prevented him from functioning properly inside the fairy realm. But this deal clearly backfired for Myrtle, who ended up losing control of himself and attacking his own family. He eventually went back to normal after his family, and especially his mother Diane, explained to him that even though he is human, they still love him as their own. Despite the fact that he is adopted, his siblings and parents love him and accept him, and this resolves the internal struggles within him. He finally recognizes that his family's love for him is real and that King and Diane would do anything for him just as much as for all their other children. And of course, Myrtle loves his family too. They're the only family he's ever known, and he is truly happy that despite technically being an outsider to the fairy realm, he finally feels like he belongs. The second oldest child of King and Diane is Sixtus, a boy who is known as the Prince of the Fairy Realm and who is confirmed to be a biological child of King and Diane, meaning that he is a fairy giant hybrid. Sixtus looks a lot like his father did back when he was first introduced in the original series, although he has pink hair instead of light brown. He also has other similarities to his father, like the fact that he is a late bloomer and still hasn't grown his fairy wings. He also has a personality that is pretty similar to early King. He can be very serious and very suspicious of others, but he can also be extremely compassionate and kind when the situation calls for it. We eventually learn that as far as the biological children of King and Diane go, some have inherited more traits from the fairy side, while others have inherited more traits from the giant side. Sixtus is said to have inherited a lot of the fairy blood and magic from his father. In fact, despite being young and still wingless, Sixtus has enough magic power to be the next in line for becoming the Fairy King. As you might expect, Sixtus is able to use all the usual fairy powers like flying, heart reading, and so on. Sixtus even has a magic spirit sword called Magliastra, which seems to function very similarly to King's spirit spear Chastaful. The spirit sword even has the ability to change its shape in a manner that is very similar to Chastaful, so Sixtus is definitely being treated as the main successor to King. Sixtus seems to be very close with all his family members, and especially with Myrtle. He seems to really look up to and admire his father, King. The third oldest child of King and Diane is Belte, a boy who also inherited a lot of fairy blood and who bears a strong resemblance to King. He even appears to have the same hair color as his father, although he wears his hair long. Unlike his older brother Sixtus, Belte has already manifested a pair of wings, and he seems to be a pretty carefree and relaxed guy overall. He likes to mess around with his siblings and even tease them, but he still cares greatly about all of them and he is willing to fight for them when the need arises. This includes risking his own life against a much stronger and more experienced opponent. Along with the usual fairy abilities like levitation, Belte also likes to employ plant manipulation powers. For example, he may summon thorny vines to trap an opponent, or command small plant creatures to attack. Belte admires his older brother Sixtus and his impressive strength, and he's also close to all of his other siblings. That said, as one of the kids who inherited a lot from the fairy side, he seems to be a bit intimidated by the size of his giant younger siblings, and like a true fairy, he prefers to eat fruit to eating meat, which is the food of choice for the giants. Now, speaking of giant siblings, let's discuss the children of King and Diane who inherited more from Diane's giant side. First up is Zana, the fourth child of King and Diane and the princess of the fairy realm. Zana looks a lot like her mother Diane did when she was younger, and because she inherited more giant blood than fairy blood, she is extremely large and much bigger than her fairy-like siblings. That said, Zana is still a fairy giant hybrid, so she's not quite as big as a purebred giant would be. Much like her appearance, Zana's personality seems to be very similar to Diane's. She can be very excited, bubbly, and sensitive, but she can also get pretty scary when she's angry. She cares deeply about her family, and she won't hesitate to violently attack anyone who poses a threat to that family. Just like the giants, Zana can use the power of creation to manipulate the earth, and she possesses great physical strength. However, her physical strength is not quite on the same level as a pureblood giant. Still, Zana is young, so it's possible that her powers will continue to grow stronger over time. And it's possible that the giant and fairy side of her powers will learn to work together and boost each other in the future. Next up is Zillion, the fifth child of King and Diane. Like Zana, she inherited a lot of blood from the giant clan, so she shares a lot of characteristics with Zana. She is much bigger than an average human, but not quite as big as a pure giant, and she is extremely strong physically and can use the power of creation. She definitely looks like her mother, including the same hair and eye color, but unlike Zana, who looks almost exactly like a young Diane, Zillion also has some resemblance to her father King. On top of that, her personality is not quite as over the top as Diane's and Zillion's, so she seems to take more after her father in that regard. But despite being a bit calmer and more laid back than her mother and sister, Zillion still cares a great deal about her family just like all the others, and she is willing to bravely fight to protect them no matter what. The sixth child of King and Diane is Fao, but interestingly enough, Fao is neither a boy or a girl, at least not yet. In chapter 140 of Four Nights of the Apocalypse, we learn that while most fairies seem to be born as either men or women, some are born essentially sexless, so they are neither, as in they have no reproductive organs at all. That said, these fairies will change into either men or women later on in life depending on who they end up falling in love with. So for example, if a sexless fairy falls in love with a man, she will become a woman, and if a sexless fairy falls in love with a woman, he will become a man. Fao's appearance seems to be a very even mixture of both King and Diane, although the giant side of Fao is dominant, so Fao is larger than normal fairies and humans. Fao's personality seems to be quite childlike overall, but it's clear that Fao is mature enough to understand the importance of family and is willing to fight to protect that family. The seventh child of King and Diane is a bubbly, pink-haired girl named Tiore. She is introduced in chapter 137 of the manga, and so far she has gotten more screen time in the manga than the previously mentioned siblings, which indicates that she might play a bigger role than the others. Tiore is very observant, and she was the first to notice that there was something different about Nasiens, but more on that very soon. Tiore has the usual fairy clan powers, but she also has an additional unique power called Summon Sin. This ability allows her to summon and control the beasts from the tattoos of the original 7 Deadly Sins. I mean, that is super interesting to me as a fan of the original series. She can summon a fox, a lion, a goat, a bear, a grizzly, a dragon, and a serpent. Even though Tiore is not the final child of King and Diane that we will be discussing in this video, she is their youngest. And before we discuss that final sibling, I do want to warn you that big manga spoilers are on the way. So the final child of King and Diane that we will be discussing is actually their oldest, but as I said earlier, this child was the one that was switched at birth with Myrtle because of a changeling. King and Diane tried their best to find this child, while also adopting Myrtle and raising him as their own, but they could never locate their lost child. At least not until that very child eventually showed up inside the fairy realm, and yeah, that child's name is Naciens. Now, for like the first 140 chapters, Naciens was believed to be a human boy, and Naciens was part of the main hero group in the series. But after coming to the fairy realm in an attempt to somehow awaken the slumbering Percival, Tioren notices that there is something different about Naciens. Not only does Naciens have no trouble living for long periods of time inside the fairy realm, even though that should be impossible for a human without magical medicine, but Tioren also notices that Naciens is not actually a boy. Not only is Naciens not a boy, but Naciens is not even human. Naciens is one of those sexless fairies just like Fowl, so Naciens is neither a boy or girl and has no reproductive organs, at least not yet. Being the eldest child of King and Diane, Naciens is technically a fairy giant hybrid, but the fairy blood seems to be significantly stronger in this particular child. Over the course of the series, Naciens falls in love with Percival, and in the most recent arcs, Naciens has taken on a much more feminine appearance. Eventually, Naciens is fully acknowledged to be a woman by the other characters. Basically, once Naciens fell in love with Percival, she fully transformed from being a sexless fairy giant hybrid to a female fairy giant hybrid because she wanted to be with Percival, and Percival is a man who is attracted to women. Now, although Percival is inside a human man's body, he technically isn't just a human. He was originally a sexless creature himself, known as a life spirit. But in his human form, Percival clearly does appreciate the ladies, so Naciens did what she had to do. If you want more information on the backstories of Percival and the other Knights of the Apocalypse, check out this video right now, link on screen and in the description. That's it for all the kids of the 7 Deadly Sins up to this point, although who knows, we might get some new ones in the future. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and comment for that YouTube algorithm. And if you don't want to miss future updates and content for 7 Deadly Sins and for Knights of the Apocalypse, please subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications.